Hello and welcome back to the Bird's Eye View podcast. We are here on Thursday, November 7th, and today we're going to do a little bit of talking about the people talking. I'm your host, Zach Worden, joined as always by Jori Negin-Shecter. And Jori, how is your monitoring of the general managers meetings in San Antonio been going?
Yes, everybody has been yapping about a whole lot of stuff that might happen, but not much has actually happened. So I am very excited to yap about the people yapping.
It's funny to me because like the general managers meetings have always been a thing. There haven't been a ton of like deals, that happen, and it seems like to me that the general managers meetings are haven't really been quite the hot stove fuel that they have been this year. It seems like there's just been a ton of like news, rumors, speculation, like more than usual. Is it just me that's feeling that, or do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's hard to know for sure, but there's definitely stuff kind of churning. I mean, it would be nice if the Blue Jays went out and, maybe did something, but it seems like not a lot of stuff. I mean, I shouldn't say that. The Angels are doing stuff.
Yeah,
Kyle
you want the
Hendricks.
Blue Jays to sign Kyle Hendricks?
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, it's been a lot of kind of whispers and rumors and murmurs, but not a lot of action. But everything we're kind of hearing from the Blue Jays side is varying degrees of, I would say, encouraging.
Yeah,
You
it's
said
definitely
unconvinced. You
no,
said
no,
unconvinced.
it's definitely after the past two, like after last off season, I think I'm just like, all right, we just need to have like a simmer down, like just report the signings. I don't know about the rumors, but no, it's definitely been a certain large number of players and possibilities. I think Ben Nicholson Smith wrote an article yesterday where his headline was like they're weighing intriguing possibilities, and it's kind of like, well, that's what this time of year is for.
Yes, it's a lot of humming and hawing, but I guess we'll see exactly what comes to pass. Do we want to get into kind of some of the stuff that they've talked about?
Yeah, let's get into some of the news and first like some of the tangible things that actually have happened and that we know. Of course, before or it was the first day of winter meeting or the general managers meetings, I believe that Genesis Cabrera was put on waivers and he cleared waivers and elected free agency. He was our bird's eye view reliever of the year, and now he is a free agent. They put him on waivers and avoid having to pay him the 2.5 million that he was projected to get in arbitration. In general, I think the move does make sense just based on some of the peripheral stuff and the season that he did have. But I mean, for him being like one of the most consistent arms that they had and having a really solid run in the middle part of the year for the Blue Jays, it was a little bit surprising to see him as one of the guys that they did waive to clear up their 40-man roster.
Yeah, clears about, I think it was 2.5 million. And based on the speculation going around about the Blue Jays payroll, it might be tight, and that 2.5 million might end up being somewhat relevant in the grand scheme of things. So, it was more of a results over process thing for him last year. He still throws very hard, obviously. And as a lefty, too, the Blue Jays don't exactly have a ton in that department either. So that's another area they're going to have to address, although the whole bullpen is going to obviously need a makeover in a big way. But the move itself, I think, surprising just in so far that he's just like a guy that they just dumped. You figure he must have had some trade value, but he goes through waivers, nobody claims him, and turns out he's just kind of a guy.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, and it's kind of like the guy that they got from St. Louis, was a dude who was striking out like nine hitters per nine. And he comes to Toronto and they obviously make some tweaks with him and the strikeout rate drops and in 2024 the walk rate went up. Like I mean he was a very call it whatever you want, like batted ball fortune. Maybe he got a little bit lucky in the way of earned runs, considering the fact that he had, a walk rate that doesn't look great, a home run rate that doesn't look great, and of course, like his FIP is almost 2 runs higher than his ERA. Um, his Sierra is like a run higher than his ERA. So, as far as that goes, I think it probably does make sense. But as you mentioned, they of course do lack the left-handed reliever depth on the active roster or on the 40-man roster, if you want to look at it that way. And so it does kind of, you look at it and you're like, oh, well, how are they going to replace this dude who, threw so many innings for them this year and so many important innings for that bullpen? When, is it Brandon Little's obviously going to have to step up into a bigger role, or are they going to add a new lefty? Like, I mean, it is a big question for now. They have like a clearly gaping hole at that position to either add in free agency, or if they're going to really bet on some of the guys they had in the minors. I know during Ross Atkins' first media availability, he mentioned Brandon Eisert and Adam Macko as two potential guys. And of course, here on the Bird's Eye View pod, we are very pro Mason Fluharty, and he did not get mentioned. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they go about filling that left-handed slot, if it is one of those guys, or if that's a position that they're targeting.
Yeah, one of the guys that hasn't necessarily been mentioned, although I think you mentioned him maybe in passing in a joking manner in the group chat. Anthony Banda from the Dodgers, maybe a guy to hunt down. I don't know. I think there's going to have to be some kind of solution found here because clearly Brendan Little cannot be your number one lefty, at least going into the season, or perhaps can't be your only lefty.
Yeah, I think was it last year that they started with Tim Meza as their only lefty in the bullpen?
Yeah. Needless to say that that is no longer the case.
Here's actually an interesting thought for you though, because Eric Swanson has pretty good splits against lefties. Like he's better against lefties than he is against righties. So do you think that in the context of the Eric Swanson arbitration decision, that makes it more likely that they're going to pick up his contract?
Well, that's the question, right? Because there's all these rumors swirling about now that Swanson could be on his way out, right? They could be looking to clear his money. I don't think I would be comfortable with them doing so. Um, but to me, it it seems like they're so tight on money that they're gonna get creative. That's kind of the word that was used. They're gonna have to get creative. And Swanson was pretty good basically second half of the year at a sub 3 ERA and was back to striking guys out. So it's just I don't know if I really have an answer here in terms of what they want to do with their bullpen and what they should do with their bullpen. But clearly they're going to have to make some changes, right?
Yeah, they obviously Cabrera is the first man through the wall, I guess if you want to call it that. But of course, they also do make a couple other moves. Emmanuel Ramirez was DFA'd off the 40-man roster. They claimed him from the Marlins towards the beginning of September, I believe. Luis Frias cleared waivers and became a free agent. I believe he set a record for like most guys put on base in the fewest amount of
Yeah.
pitches as a
It
Blue
was
Jay.
not a pleasant experience. Him and Jose Cuas.
Yeah.
It was two dudes that will likely be forgotten to the annals of time with the Blue Jays.
Yes. And then they claim Michael Peterson off waivers from the Marlins. He's like a 6'7" dude who has some pretty good stuff. I think he only throws a fastball and a cutter, which is a really weird pitch mix to have. But yeah, we'll see what happens there. And then of course, Luis De Los Santos was claimed off waivers by the Mets. So the Blue Jays needed to clear the 4 roster spots, and the 4 that they targeted were De Los Santos, Cabrera, Frias, and Ramirez. I'm sure that we'll see a couple more like moves in the same vein as this, like as we get closer to the Rule 5, or get closer to I guess it would be that Rule 5 deadline, which I think is comes up pretty quick, like November 19th. So I'm sure we'll see a couple more moves like that, but I mean, any of those like worth a moment of time, do you think, other than Cabrera?
I mean, maybe Luis De Los Santos just to let him go for nothing, but really, I don't feel like there's anything of too great a value lost. And I would suspect, like you said, because the 40-man roster has to be crystallized towards the end of the month, that we'll likely see a couple of other guys shuffle around. Now, I don't know if the Blue Jays are going to be active in the Rule 5 draft. It doesn't really seem like they are primed to do so per se. But if there's some reliever left unprotected or something like that, then
That's a pretty creative
probably
solution.
that seems like something that could make some sense. Perhaps they run it back with maybe you find the next Joe Biagini in there or something like that. Or who was the guy that they took from the Rays? I think the following year, or it was the Royals. Spark something. Or
Maybe
anyways,
they could run it back with a loophole type pitcher.
perhaps with it. Well, I'm not sure if that's something that you want to run it back with an Elvis Luciano, but needless to say, there's options to be had. Speaking of guys, kind of again the depth options, Eric Verdino electing free agency. Also, I think maybe a brief mention of that because I thought that he was going to factor into the Blue Jays bullpen plans this year.
Yeah. It I obviously wasn't aware that his time was up, but for a dude who's kind of been in the organization for as long as he has, like I guess it does kind of make sense. Obviously found his stride this year, and I figure that that's probably the type of guy you try and bring back. I know he was Rule 5 eligible, so I'm not sure if they were to re-sign him how that would impact that, but I'm sure that he's got a fair number of people calling right now to try and get him for next year.
Yeah, you figure it's just kind of a case of just not comfortable putting him on the 40 man. And if he wasn't on the 40 man, he had the opportunity to elect free agency, and that's ultimately where he goes. Right now, is he going to end up on a major league roster next year? I'm not certain, but I do suspect that there will be teams sniffing around on him.
Yeah, you could see him signing with like the Rays or something.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's keep on moving. A fair amount of news that we haven't gotten the chance to talk about, and of course, one of those news tidbits is Dalton Varsho winning the Gold Glove in center field for the 2024 season. Very well deserved for him. Ernie Clement does not win at third base, beaten out by Alex Bregman there. And then, of course, Dalton Varsho, I think he's a pretty good candidate to win the Platinum Glove, which will be awarded tomorrow.
Yes, make sure you vote for him if you haven't already. I would suspect that the Varsho Platinum Glove situation certainly a possibility. But as far as the Gold Glove goes, exciting to see him honored because obviously last year the whole kerfuffle, if you will, of him not winning was so egregious. So for him to win this year, definitely well deserved. And Ernie Clement as well definitely had an outside shot. Unfortunately, he doesn't ultimately earn the honor, but who knows? Maybe it's future Blue Jay Alex Bregman taking that honor instead, right?
Yes,
They
Varsho.
do sneaky need a third baseman, although they might be solving that internally.
What did Ben Nicholson Smith tweet was the priority order? Outfield, third base, second base?
I think it was something to that effect.
Yeah.
Needless to say, it sure doesn't sound like they will be targeting Alex Bregman in any meaningful capacity.
Seems like he's probably going to be staying put, which I think is probably the best spot for him.
With that Crawford box and the pull power, I mean that
Yeah.
probably seems about right.
Yeah. All right, let's get into some of the speculation. I think the speculation from the week, there was a lot of it, and there was a lot of chatting, like we talked about already. But who is the who is your favorite player that was connected to the Blue Jays this week?
Man, am I allowed to say Devin Williams? I think I projected him to end up with the Blue Jays, and he gets mentioned by Shai Davidi as one of the relievers that are maybe made available. He wasn't really linked in a super meaningful capacity. I mean, I quite like him. I mean, I guess it's good to hear that they're aiming higher than Yusei Kikuchi. That's the word from BNS. I I think that, to me, it sounds like they're going for starting pitching, and I'm not sure I totally understand that, but maybe you can kind of lay it out to me.
Yeah, I think, obviously we talked a little bit about it before we hit record, but I think when you look at it, the Blue Jays rotation could be in a little bit of a tricky spot in 2025. Obviously, Kevin Gossman, Jose Barrios, and Chris Bassett, all aging pitchers. And if you're looking at the three of them as, the staples in your rotation, that maybe you do want to go out and potentially add to that group and potentially add a guy who can headline that group because you don't have confidence in the three of them being the guys that they were in 2023, right? And I think when you look at some of the projection systems, like, I mean, obviously the steamer projections have come out um for all three of those guys. Like, it's probably not exactly what you wanted to see. I mean, Gossman here, he's projected 3.86 ERA over 193 innings. I think you're pretty happy with that. But again, for a guy who was a Cy Young runner-up a couple years ago, that's not exactly the aging curve that you probably want. Bassett, a 4.08 ERA, Barrios, a 4.24. Like, I mean, all these projection systems are probably fairly similar to what the Blue Jays have, right? So for them, probably looking at, they were connected to both Max Fried and Blake Snell this week. So you add one of those guys to kind of headline your rotation. And I think that it kind of makes sense for one of those guys to be a Blue Jay, because obviously neither of them is going to be throwing like 200 innings. And you have these three guys who are going to eat innings. So you can kind of probably have a guy who isn't quite as much of an inning eater and is more of like an inning dominator, right? Like the innings are going to be really good. There's just not going to be as many of them. And then you can move Yariel Rodriguez to the bullpen if you need in that scenario, and that provides you a solution there for your bullpen instead of having to spend all that money on a reliever. But it also does seem a little bit weird to give up on Yariel, who clearly fancies himself as a starter in year two of that contract.
Yeah, and it also feels like Rodriguez has upside as a starter too. I mean, even though he had some problems staying healthy and didn't really go deep into a lot of games, he still had a lot of success basically the second half of the season. So it feels, at least to me, that he's a guy you should probably be penciling in a similar capacity to a guy like Adam Francis, who also seems to be getting penciled into the Blue Jays rotation next year. So I don't know if it's just a case of they want the extra insurance, but it feels like if you're gonna go spend big, doing so on a starter when this is a team that has perpetually been lacking this power for the last couple of years, that to me is, I think, the disconnect.
I think it is a little bit scary to hear that, like, they're going so hard in the starting pitching market when starting pitching was, sure, maybe not as good as it was in 2023 and 24, but it definitely wasn't the issue as to why they were so bad in 2024. And so I think, you look at it and it feels like they are not learning from what has gone wrong. And of course, you know what, they were connected to Anthony Santander and Gleyber Torres and ha-seong Kim, right? Like, I mean, there were some of the position player connects as well. But when you hear that starting pitching is their priority, I mean, you look at it and you're kind of like, well, why? Like, it's not what you ideally need, right? Like, there's dudes who are going to hit home runs who are available on the market. And for a team who lacked power like the Blue Jays did, it feels like maybe you should be prioritizing those guys, especially when you only have 20 or $25 million to work with, as has been speculated.
Yeah, listen, like, I'm not pro Santander by any means. I think you're much higher on him than I am, but I would put him higher on the shopping list than a guy like a Max Fried or a Blake Snell, especially because like those two guys, again, you alluded to it earlier about having guys that can chew innings, and you don't need those two to chew innings, but they're both on the fragile side, right? So it's not like you're going out there and adding a workhorse. You're going out there and you're adding probably not a number one, maybe a number two, maybe a number three, but you're leaving your corner outfield positions right now as George Springer and Joey Loperfido, which doesn't make sense to me. Unless they have some plans to go out and pry Brett Rooker, who apparently isn't going anywhere. So I'm not really sure what the plan is.
Yeah, that's the part I guess we just kind of got to wait for. I think obviously Rooker would be very nice if he was available, but the A's, just the A's, are keeping him. So yeah, it's gonna be kind of interesting. I mean, there's also the Bo Bichette thing where Ross Atkins told John Morosi that a Bichette trade was an easy no from his perspective. And there's, of course, Ross mentioned moving Vlad to third. I think John Heyman said that they're open to moving Vlad to third for Pete Alonso. Um, it would be some seriously, crazy moves. I think you look at the Blue Jays roster, and if you add Pete Alonso and you put Vladimir Guerrero Jr. at third base, it's kind of funny, like just how little it seems like defense has become the priority. And like we're sitting here talking, they need to add power. Well, Pete Alonso is gonna bring you that power. But to me, it just seems like so antithetical to what this front office has done over the last few years, because Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Bo Bichette as the left side of your infield is not going to be doing your pitching staff a ton of favors.
Is there a chance if they do go out and get Pete Alonso that we see a three first baseman infield with those two and then Spencer Horwitz at second? Like that's not a defense worth really, writing home about. Obviously, the outfield defense will be much stronger, buoyed by Varsho, but that's not really a playable defense out there in the infield.
It's certainly something. I mean, if you really wanted to get crazy, like I mean, you throw a Relvis at short, put Vlad at third, put Dalton Varsho behind the plate.
Just the
We could
least
we could
optimal, defensive alignment for the Blue
we could
Jays.
we could really get weird. We could really get weird.
Needless to say, I don't know if that's necessarily something they should be doing. Again, I keep pointing to the corner outfield spots. You've got guys like, never mind Santander. If you want to go cheaper, Profar is going to be cheaper. Jock Peterson's going to be cheaper, even though he's probably a DH at this stage. But still, guys are out there with power, with the ability to hit bombs, and they're targeting a totally different area of the infield and the pitching staff. It just makes no sense to me.
What are your thoughts on the Gleyber Ha-seong Kim connections?
The Gleyber one to me is bizarre. They have so many second basemen, and not all of them are good second basemen. Like you've got, Horwitz, kinda, Wagner. You've got Leo Jimenez, who's going to probably be a backup infielder because Bo Bichette's your starting shortstop. You've got, did I mention Davis Schneider? I mean, they've got about 40 names there just for second baseman. Like they've got a glut of them. And I get that you're likely to use some of that as trade capital, but to go out and add to that glut by adding a guy that's good, not elite, but good, doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think he would be a weird ad because he was, I think, the worst defensive second baseman in baseball last year. And you talk about not wanting to have a Vlad Bo left side of the infield, but having a Vlad Glaber middle infield would probably also not be an ideal defensive alignment. And for Glaber, I mean, I don't know if he is the dude that hit 38 home runs in 2019, when of course, like 20 of those home runs came against the Orioles. He was pretty good in 2023. I mean, 120 WRC plus in 23, and then this year he was 104 WRC plus, but finished the year pretty strong. So it's an interesting probably shot at like trying to add a budget guy or a guy who you can probably get more value out of offensively than you would have to pay him for. But I just think the nature of what he's been since that 2019 season scares me a little bit too much. And again, like we've been talking about, like you just said, there are more pressing needs for this team than what Gleyber Torres would provide them at second base.
Yeah, and there's better fits, so I don't really get what the ad there is. Ha-seong Kim is more compelling to me. I think he probably comes in at a cheaper price tag. He's obviously coming off an injury, but the the fit's a little cleaner. Defensively, he's obviously a lot stronger, and he's shown capability with the bat at times.
He's very Blue Jays esque.
Yeah,
I
like
would
I
think.
don't, it doesn't excite me,
Like
which
the Glaber, like it's the Glaber ceiling is higher offensively, and Ha-seong Kim.
is made to be a Blue Jay.
Well, I mean, like he is so good defensively, and he's like a league average bat. I don't know if he'll ever be much more than that based on how hard he hits the ball and some of the struggles that he's had with velocity. But I think that it's just he's a guy who runs the base as well, which is something that Ross Atkins mentioned this week, and he's a guy who in an ideal world, he probably gives you the year that he did in 2023, which is a 4.2 win season, 110 WRC plus, 17 homers, 38 stolen bases, getting on base at a 351 clip. Um, but when you look at that, I mean, like, could you get that? Could you get 17 home runs, a 351 on base, and some pretty solid second base defense? I mean, you could probably string that together somehow from what you've got on the roster. Maybe not the second base defense part, but at least the 17 home runs, the on base percentage. I mean, you could probably get that combined from like Will Wagner, or Relvis, Davis Schneider, and Horwitz.
Yeah, 100% you could. I don't think that they should be targeting a second baseman. I'll be frank. It's you
I
they're
feel
well
like we're
listen, it's like they keep walking in these directions. There are two very obvious holes in this lineup. They are in left field and they are in right field. Springer obviously is what he is at this stage. He's probably a fourth outfielder at this point. If they could maybe by some miracle swing a George Springer trade to free up some money, I mean, maybe that's something that they managed to do. But like, there are two very obvious holes in their lineup in need of filling. And I'm not entirely sure why they keep trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
What do you think about George Springer's steamer projections? I'll read them out to you. 243 average, 318 OBP, 410 slug, 109 WRC plus, 23 home runs, 15 stolen bases.
I'll take the under on basically all of those. I just don't think that he's probably a guy anymore. If they can get a 109 on WRC plus out of him next year, then you can work with that. You can probably live with that. But
There's no
like,
way he can hit leadoff for them next year, right?
no, absolutely not. So I mean, who's your leadoff guy? Bo? I guess it's Bichette. Maybe you go out and you find a guy. It seems like there's a couple of options that are that are capable.
It should be Vlad.
It should, I mean, you said it, not me, but
You know
it
what's
could be.
crazy? You know what's crazy? This is like totally a tangent, but the Yankees not leading off Juan Soto. Like it felt like in the World Series every single time. Like Gleyber was pretty good in the World Series, but it felt like every time the Yankees were at the bottom of the order, like they're just begging to get to Soto. And Soto's hitting second. So it's like, they're getting to the bottom of the
They
order and
had they had
like
an extra guy in the way.
and it's like, man, if you just like moved everybody up a spot, like went Soto Judge, then you would be getting there a lot sooner. Like, I mean, it just felt like every time they were going through the order, it was like, man, they Soto's three hitters away and Soto's two hitters away and there's two outs. And when you needed him to be one hitter away with two outs, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just, the Blue Jays, I feel like it's a lesson to be learned with Vlad. And like Vlad this year, the fact that he never moved up from hitting third in the order as well, I think he should probably be hitting in the top two.
Well, on a tangentially related note, since you brought him up, should we have another Juan Soto discussion after John Heyman drops that article yesterday mentioning a couple of names, including
Uh,
the Toronto Blue Jays?
he, I,
So it was he
what
gave
did
a list of
Boris call him?
he gave
Boris called him Mr. Wonderful or something?
something like that. That wasn't even his best one. My favorite one was the Snelling
The
salts. That
Snell
was
was, yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah.
That was so funny. Or the Corbin Burns one, I can't remember, but it also got a truckload of me.
He's a Corbin copy.
Yeah, it was something stupid like that. But no, the Heyman list from yesterday. Obviously, he goes Yankees, Mets, Dodgers, but the speculation is that he's unlikely to go to the West Coast. And then fourth on that list, Blue Jays. And apparently, the Yankees feel they are the biggest contender behind the Mets because they don't think he wants to go to the West Coast. So get ready to hang that runner up to the runner up banner.
I think it was a Ben Nicholson Smith article where it was like they are going to give Juan Soto the value that they believe he deserves. Like they are gonna have a number for him, but they won't come off of that, right? Whereas with Otani, it seemed like there was probably a little bit of a bidding war. But for Soto, that they might just be getting to, and I don't want to attribute that. It might not have been Ben who said that, but that they might not budge off the value or the numerical whatever their formula poops out for what Juan Soto's worth.
I mean, that's probably what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know if Juan
I
Soto's
just
willing to go to the Blue
I
Jays.
I just think it just seems so likely that Steve Cohen is going to be like, here's $700 million, and everybody's going to be like, all right, go enjoy being a New York Met.
Yeah, that seems probably what's going to happen. Although, I mean, it kind of sounds like the Yankees are the team to beat there because he's familiar with the Yankees.
Yeah,
But
I
it would be much better if he ended up a Met for the Blue Jays' sake.
yes, that would be seeing him go back to the NL would probably be an ideal scenario
Yeah,
for the Blue Jays.
that would be welcome. That would be very much welcome.
Thoughts on Roki Sasaki? BNS connected the Blue Jays to him, said that they would show some serious interest if he were to be posted. However, it does seem unlikely that he is going to be posted.
I mean, we're both intimately familiar with one individual that feels that him being posted would be nothing short of absolute lunacy, and feels it's
The
unlikely.
world might end.
The world might end. Um, so I suspect he probably doesn't get posted, but if he does, like he should get more than Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Now I know he's not really eligible to get that because of the signing cap stuff, but this is the best pitching prospect, probably not named Paul Skeens on the planet, even though Skeens kind of isn't a prospect anymore.
Yeah.
So excuse me. Excuse me, but yeah, if Roki Sasaki is available, go get him.
Yeah, it would be a tough negotiation. I think that there's some financial barriers in the way for the Blue Jays based on where their international pool stands for 2024. But yeah, you can always work around that stuff. So
Make it work. It's Roki Sasaki. If he's made available. Listen,
uh,
if Roki Sasaki ends up a Blue Jay, it'd be a good time.
that would be the starting pitcher that's worth.
That would be the starting pitcher worth having.
Okay, before we go, I'm gonna get you to rank each of the guys that we mentioned or that has been connected to the Blue Jays this week in order of your preference for them becoming a Blue Jay. And so that is Max Fried, Blake Snell, Ha-seong Kim, Gleyber Torres, Anthony Santander. Am I missing anybody?
I don't think so. I think that's pretty
All
much
right,
everybody.
go with those.
Okay. It's tough. There's a lot of names to remember. I think my number one guy on that list probably is just on pure talent. I think it is Max Fried. I think of all those guys that are able to be difference makers and probably provide value for their contracts. I think he's my guy. I don't think that he makes a lot of sense for the Blue Jays, but if you had to shell out for a pitcher, I think I'd take him over Blake Snell, which I know you don't necessarily agree with. And I'm sure you'll give me your lowdown on that in a moment. I think second on that list, just by default in that case, then becomes Anthony Santander, just because they do clearly need a corner outfielder and they clearly need a guy with pop. And wouldn't you know it, Anthony Santander is both of those things. Also, switch hitter. Blue Jays lack left-handed hitting outside of basically Spencer Horwitz, so that would make some sense as well. Behind them, I guess then you're going with probably Blake Snell because on true talent, I guess he's probably the best true talent player of that group. And then I probably would round it out with Ha-seong Kim, and then last probably Gleyber Torres.
Yes, I'm probably fairly close to you. I think I would go Santander just because of the need and the fit. And I know that there's like some concerns about how he would age or whatever, but I mean he's a dude who's gonna hit home runs and he's gonna slug and he seems like a fairly good clubhouse, like a Teoscar Hernandez kind of type clubhouse presence. So, seems like there would be a lot of good to come out of that signing. Second, I would go Blake Snell. Him and Max Fried are like so similar if you kind of look at the numbers, and like each are like early 30s left-handed pitchers who excel at run prevention, but they do it differently, right? Max Fried is a very ground ball heavy pitcher, and Blake Snell just strikes everybody out and has super great stuff. Um, I just think that Snell is a little bit better, and in a vacuum, I'm probably taking Snell. I wrote a piece for Just Baseball. I think it'll come out later today. Free ads, yes. But I wrote in there that Fried would be an awesome fit for the Jays because of the Blue Jays defense being so good last year. Of course, we spent the entirety of this episode being like, wow, they can't make all these moves. The defense will be bad. So maybe he wouldn't be, but yeah, I think Blake Snell is a little bit more defense proof, a little bit more team proof in a vacuum. I would rather have the guy that's going to strike out 30% hitters than the guy that's going to need to rely on his defense in the high 50s% of the time. So I would go Snell. That's not to, drag Fried at all. I think he's a really good pitcher, has a really great track record. He would be next on my list there. And then I would go Ha-seong Kim and Gleyber Torres to round that out.
Yeah, which makes sense. I mean, the both of the second basemen, it kind of seems like we're in agreement that there's no need. There's just no need. They have so many guys, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense from out of second baseman. Now, watch the Blue Jays immediately as soon as this podcast drops, sign Gleyber Torres to a 4x75 deal or something crazy like that.
That would be if he gets, I mean, let me look up what his Fangraphs projection is, because it's yeah. So Fangraphs, Ben Clemens has him 5 years, $90 million.
Like, I'm just so incredibly not interested in giving him $90 million. I don't think I can overstate how little I want to give Gleyber Torres $90 million.
Here are his steamer projections: 258 average, 330 OBP, 404 slug, 108 WRC plus, 2.9 WAR.
This is just George Springer, but on the infield. This is literally George Springer, but a second baseman. I'm just so incredibly not interested.
Yeah, he's I don't know. He's just not the guy that I would want to target if I was a general manager. But
does not fit for the Blue Jays. But apparently the Blue Jays don't agree with us. So
one last question for you before we run. Another report that Ben Nicholson Smith had is that the Blue Jays, that is, are canvassing the trade market, knowing that their young position player core has some value. So that's Will Wagner, Spencer Horwitz, Ernie Clement, I guess, David Schneider, Joey Lopapito, Jonathan Clase, all these guys. Who out of that group would you be most willing to trade and least willing to trade?
I think of that group, the most willing to trade is by default Schneider, just based on his lack of results last year in terms of a pure just a willingness to trade him. And you've got to figure that based on his 2023, somebody's going to be out there kind of being like, well, there's got to be something to tap into that's compelling. So I think that he's probably the guy I'd be most willing to part with. Now, with that said, do I think he's going to net the largest return? Probably not. I think that goes to Spencer Horwitz. Now, I'm not sure if the Blue Jays are going to be willing to deal him, but it does feel like he would be a good sell high candidate. Now, in terms of who I'd be least interested, I think that probably goes to a guy like Will Wagner just based on what he showed last year and his basically de facto starting second baseman role he's got right now. I think he's the starting baseman for next season, all things considered. I don't think that he's a guy that I want to trade. I think I want to see what he's got.
You're gonna hate my answer to these questions. Most willing for me, I think Spencer Horwitz. I mean, he's an older prospect who just showed power that we've never seen before. I think selling him at this point would be a really great point of value. I think he can get you a pretty good return just based on what he showed. Obviously, it is a little bit of a risk, like because he was so good against right-handed pitching, and so trading him, perhaps, you trade him and he ends up being really good, and you trade him for Devin Williams, and then Devin Williams leaves in a year. And kind of looks a little silly. However, Spencer Horwitz is 26, so that probably does play into that a little bit, being an older prospect. I think I'm kind of on the same boat as you, as Will Wagner being like one of the guys I'd be least willing to trade. I think as like a potential leadoff hitter, he's probably a solid dude, but I mean, as far as the power goes, like I just don't think with his swing shape that there'll be much power in there. Another dude who I would be unwilling to trade is Leo Jimenez. I think he is very good defensively, and I think what he showed offensively this year, combined with what he brings with the glove, makes him extremely valuable for the Blue Jays, with Bo Bichette potentially being either traded or leaving at free agency. And just as a general infield depth, I think he is a guy that you want to kind of keep around.
I think you're a lot higher on Leo Jimenez than I am, but I
He's
guess
also
we'll see what the Blue
23.
Jays. That's a good point too. I guess we'll see what the Blue Jays
I mean,
themselves actually end up.
the real answer to the question is Relvis Martinez being like the least of that group. And I mean, probably neither of us like necessarily considered him. But if you really want to go like a high upside trade, Relvis is probably the one that's going to get you the most back.
Yeah, although there's a chance that teams are scared off by the whole missing the whole year from PEDs, but he's probably the guy with the most enticing future.
Yeah, quite the skill set there, and he continued to flash that after returning from that suspension. All right. That is going to do it for us here today at the Bird's Eye View podcast. Make sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons if you're watching on YouTube. If you're not watching there, you can find us at the Bird's Eye View pod. If you're listening along on the podcast provider of your choice, make sure to drop a follow and review. If there's anything you want us to tackle this off season, whether it be a mailbag or anything that you can come up with, you can shoot us an email at birdseyeviewpod@gmail.com. You can follow us all on Twitter. I'm at Worden_Zach. Jori is at Jori Negin-Shecter. And the pod is at BEB_pod. Thanks so much for listening.